Okay, thank you for joining us. We have a few more minutes and then we'll be getting started. Okay, we can go ahead and get started. So welcome to the North Dakota Brain Injury Network's webinar Wednesday. So thank you everybody for joining us today. We appreciate it. We are joined today by our guest speaker, Barbara Rubin. And Barbara is an author of a book, More Than You Can See, that shares the story of her and her family's journey with brain injury. So we welcome her today and I appreciate it. And so Barbara is we're going to kind of do this as sort of a guided discussion, I would say. Barbara is going to, start out with sharing, some of their story and those pieces. But if you have questions for her or want to share, feel free to either type them into the chat or even just take yourself off mute, put yourself on video, ask the questions, all of that. We want this to be set up as kind of a discussion. So Barbara, I'm going to kick it over to you for you to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Barbara, and this is my book, More Than You Can See, a Mother's Memoir. And the story centers around my older daughter, Jen, who was in a car accident at the age of 17 and suffers a traumatic brain injury. And I know this is an all too familiar story to this audience. She was in a coma for a few days, and, her, life and death, that was the question which was going to win out. But after 10 days, she started to awaken. And as often happens, after a severe traumatic brain injury, you have to learn all of your basic life skills. And that was the case with Jennifer. She had to learn how to sit and eat and walk, sit, stand, the whole thing. But as we started working with Jen, we found that her language center had been severely damaged as a result of the accident. So she wasn't understanding what we were telling her, and she couldn't verbalize what her thoughts were. And there was also frontal lobe damage, which presents itself as being the person is inappropriate, and those kind of issues were also present. So, why tell my story? Because it's, like I said, all too familiar. There's many books out there from survivors and from family members, but there was a uniqueness to the fact that language was taken out of the equation for my daughter. And how do you work with somebody who doesn't understand you? And you've got to teach them all these things. And, you know, I also wrote the book because not only was there the sad parts, but there was also a lot of funny and entertaining parts to my family's journey. Because Jen ended up with a very quirky personality as a result of her accident. And, you know, many people that worked with her viewed her as being really funny. And she didn't have words, but she had a way of getting her message through. You clearly understood when she was happy. You knew immediately when she was mad. And, you know, a lot of other emotions in between. So because of this language problem, we had to step outside of the normal course of what you do to help somebody to learn things, and that everything had to be done differently. And professionals that worked with Jen were really challenged because they learned in their coursework, this is how you worked with somebody that had this problem. And Jen didn't follow the rules or understand those guidelines. They had to really think outside the box how to do this with her. So for the first year and a half, Jen was in a more acute care setting because, again, it was a severe injury. And it took her that long to get to where she could then move on to the next phase. My family realized that it was not going to be possible for us to bring her home. She required 24-hour-a-day supervision because she would often get up at night and roam around, could get in trouble, and, you know, and mobility was not her issue. After they taught her how to walk again, she was off and going. So we decided, and, you know, it's not an easy decision, but we decided to move her into a group home facility. And it's in that setting that the story really starts taking place. Up to that, it's more introduction for the reader to understand traumatic brain injury, the ramifications of a traumatic brain injury, what the survivor faces, what the family faces. But the real heart of my story comes when she goes to the group home and we have private caregivers that work with her as one-on-ones. And the connection she makes with these people and the uniqueness and specialness of that is why I wrote the story. I wanted people to know that, first of all, it's okay to reach out for help when you know you can't do everything. You know, it's hard as parents. We think, okay, it's our child. We should take care of them. But realizing when it's something that you can't do, knowing where your energy and your strengths are. And I say, if you realize this is going to be hard for you, use your energy in advocating for them where they need to be and get the help that you need. So that was one part that I thought was important, an important message for families that have people who are disabled in whatever capacity. You know, the other thing was thinking outside of the box as far as caregiving and caregivers and what you can do and what some of the possibilities are if you to be a little, thinking, well, not everybody does that, and that's okay. And realizing that by doing some of these extra things, you really can give a person a meaningful and fulfilling life as a result of it. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, why I felt it was important to tell the story. I think that for those who have been exposed to brain injury, we all realize it's not the way Hollywood scripts it. And I think that the public often doesn't understand what all the family and the survivor go through. And I think these kind of stories that engage not just, this segment of, who might read my story, but just the general public, when they have more understanding, I think they have more empathy and tolerance. And I think that that's really important because, we have TBI people in our families, in our communities, in our workplaces, in our schools. And, the general public really needs to understand what this injury means. So there you go. Anybody have a question?
Yeah, does anybody else have any questions, or I want to give you guys an opportunity. So can you, at what age was Jen when she had her injury?
She was 17. And, youth is helpful with a traumatic brain injury, we always hear. And, I don't know. I've seen older people have better recoveries. But, the one thing that we did when we got, excuse me, I got a frog in my throat. When we hired caregivers for her in the group home, is by then she was like, a young adult. She was like, close to 20 now. And I purposely hired young women to work with her because I didn't want them to just do the basics of, you get her dressed, you get her fed, you do this, you do that. I wanted them to build a life for her that would as closely resemble what she would have if she had not had the accident. And that would be going off and doing things that young people do. And I also found that working with these young women, I trained them how I wanted them to work with her, how to work with somebody that doesn't have language, and how to get things done with her. And I found they were a lot more pliable to work with than somebody that's been doing it for a few decades or something. And they're like, well, no, this is the way it's done. Can't do that. My young people were willing to try things, to think up things. They had that youthful energy and, and again, were willing to try things that were not the standard. And some beautiful things happened as a result of that. So for my daughter, for all appearance purposes, she was out and about with her friends. And, I think that worked in a very positive way for us.
Okay. And so now, as you said, so she was 17 at the time of the injury. And so she was still in high school. And so you wanted to create kind of that normal, adolescence transition to young adulthood experience for her.
Exactly. Um, her caregivers, took her on trips. And as they started getting into their 20s, they got married, they have families, and they bring Jen into their families as part of their families. Again, not something that's typically done. Usually employers, because this was through a whole rehabilitation facility in their group home. And the norm is usually that an employer tells you, keep work and your personal life separated. And in this case, I encourage them to do something very different. And so she was brought into young families that had young children. She became their Aunt Jen. And so she didn't have children of her own. But she had the experience of being around all these little kids, which, was a big positive for these young kids growing up to be around somebody who was severely disabled and learning all this acceptance and everything was really an amazing part of the story.
So we have a question in the chat. Which therapy helped the most, and were speech therapists able to bring her voice back?
Okay. Which therapy helped the most? I think the when she was in the acute rehab place, the thing that we were most desperate for at the time was for her to learn to eat, because she had a G tube. And the G tube, was becoming compromised, was a real issue. But Jen wanted nobody near her mouth. Her lips were sealed. And figuring out how to get her to start eating was really so important for her health and what was going on with this G tube. And that's kind of the first look at what it took to do something different to get the patient to do it, because she wouldn't open her mouth. So the therapist speech language therapists, because they start with the eating, would rub lollipops on her lips, all different flavors, just to try to get her to lick her lips or something and say, maybe that's pretty good. And after doing that for quite a while, Jen wanted nothing to do with them. At that particular point in time, this is just a little tidbit that's in the book. She was in a wheelchair, very mobile in her wheelchair. She still hadn't learned to walk. But she's strolling up and down the hallways on her free time, and she goes by the nursing cart, and they know that speech therapy's been trying to, get her to eat. So the nurse hands her a lollipop, and Jen sticks it in her mouth and chews it up. Now, this is not the way you usually teach somebody to eat. You start with pureed foods, and you have to go through swallowing tests and the whole thing, because there's a lot involved in eating, how you move the food around, how you swallow, what do you do with the tongue? And, can you do it without choking? She just chewed up a lollipop and ate it. So, the nurses call, speech language pathology. Jen just ate a lollipop. What do we do? Well, obviously she knows how to swallow. So we'll start working with her. And so we started with Jen would only accept crunchy food, not the way you usually work with a person, but we did start getting food introduced. It was a process, but that was the first really helpful therapy for her. We had speech language pathologists all the way through, the first year and a half specifically, she had that like daily. Then as we moved to the group home, she still had that a couple times a week, but we now understood that she really couldn't express herself in words. So the thing now was to try to find if there was any other language component in there that we could tap into. Could she understand pictures? Could she understand writing? Could she sing, or could you sing to her? There's all different things that you can try. And that's part of the story, all the things that we worked with trying to help her find her words.
So it does seem that you did utilize a lot of non-traditional or ways that as part of that kind of just trying to connect with Jen. Can you kind of explain that process for you of discovery and being willing to kind of seek out these different avenues?
Well, after Jen's accident, I no longer worked. Jen became my job. Now, she was in a care facility, but I went there every day. I watched all the therapy sessions so that I could learn what they were trying to do, how they did it, come up with ideas for them or take ideas from them. So that first year and a half, I was with her every day. And when she went to the group home, initially I had to be with her again every day because now new people are trying to work with her and they don't know, how do you get somebody to do something when you can't? So it took me training them. This is how you get her to do things, how she will understand that, you want her to get up or sit down or any of these things. And then it was like, because she was so unique in her disability, and the professionals oftentimes seemed to be so stumped, I did a lot of my own research. And one of the places that was extremely helpful to me was, we were living in New York State at the time, was the New York Brain Injury Association. They had conferences. I went to them. I went to the workshops in those conferences to learn anything I could and to gather information. I searched out through doctors, books, the whole 9 yards. But the brain injury associations or networks throughout the country are a huge lifeline for survivors and their families as a resource center. Knowing who can you turn to ask some of these questions. And when I had any one particular therapy person, they had a lot of cases. I only had one. And so I could really focus on what to do for my daughter to help her get better.
So as part of that, you had mentioned that I believe that Jen was your oldest child.
Yes.
And so what other children do you have in the family?
Okay. Jen had a younger sister, Amy. Amy was 13 at the time of the accident. She was an unbelievably strong 13-year-old. And she was amazing. She's still amazing. Not she was. But as a 13-year-old, she came like during the summer months to a lot of the therapy sessions, especially at that first rehab place. And she found it really fascinating. How do you go about teaching somebody to eat when they don't know how to do that anymore. She loved it. And we didn't know it at the time, but this was going to lead her on a career path. She is now a speech language pathologist. But, she, at that very young age, became part of our team. When my husband, Mark, and I had a decision to make, we included Amy in that decision. We're thinking that this is the right place to move Jen to next. How does this seem to you? What do you think? Did you like it? Did you not? Hey, we're thinking of doing this with Jen. Does that seem like a good idea? And she was so on board and was so helpful, especially once she got to college and started taking, her communications courses. And say, hey, Mom, I just learned this. Did you try this with Jen? And, she then became a great resource for me.
That's wonderful. Wonderful that was able to, like you said, put her on a career trajectory and be so involved in part of that.
Right. And we're fortunate because traumatic brain injury tears many families apart. And I understand that. We all handle stress differently. We all, it's just so hard on families. And I have to say, we were one of the lucky ones that came out still as a very strong family unit. We have our scars, but it didn't make us dysfunctional as far as how we could be and interact with each other. And I want to throw something else out, because I've mentioned that we had these private caregivers. At the time of Jen's accident, a federal law was passed, the Supplemental Needs Trust. And Jen was one of the first people in New York State to benefit from that legislation. So she had money, funding that was protected because of this legislation that allowed us to do things to really help build a life for her. And I would hope that families who are faced with a brain injury situation, and there's any lawsuits and settlements involved, that they do have an awareness of that law and the benefits that it can really have for that survivor.
So, and I think that is really important, and that is one of the recommendations that we often make to people, is that they do involve like an attorney to help them set up any type of trust, look at that, doing benefits planning. I think that is really important for people as part of their brain injury journey. And so now you described, so Jen did go to the group home and she was in the group home, but then you also had private duty staff that worked with her in addition to the group home staff?
Yes. Again, because I guess because of the frontal lobe injury also, Jen just, well, it was like when she woke up from her coma, that she woke up on an alien planet. She really didn't understand how this world worked at all. She didn't understand if the stove was hot. She didn't understand that this was poisonous. She didn't know to watch out for ice, or to step off of a curb, or not walk in front of a car or anything. And that's all fine. But in a group home, you have a lot of staff. But in her group home setting, there were 6 clients. And not always did somebody have their eye on Jen, and she could get into a lot of trouble. So, if something was on the stove, she could go over and touch it, get herself burned. But she was very mobile. And one of her obsessions after she learns to eat is eating. And she doesn't have a full mechanism, it appears. And so she's always on the prowl for food and always knew when somebody wasn't watching her. And she would go raid the kitchen or the garbage can or whatever she could. Go through people's purses looking for candy or treats they may have in there. So she really needed to have somebody that was watching her, for the safety, for her safety, for the safety of her environment and other people. And, it wasn't like she was going to harm somebody else, but she just couldn't be let loose.
Okay. And so in that sense, how were these private caregivers, were there 24 hours a day in addition to her being at the group home?
No, they were just during her waking hours.
Just during her waking hours.
Just
And
during the
so
week.
were those employees of the group home in addition, or were they employees of you?
Okay. They were employees of what it was. It was called Disability in Connecticut, and they had a whole series of group homes. So they were employees of Ability. They had their initial training through that organization. And then I used Jen's funds to have them come on board as private caregivers just for her. Was that done anywhere else in the organization before we got there? No. This was one of the things where we started say, okay, we need to change the rules a little bit. Here's the situation. It's not good for her. She needs this oversight, and we have the funds to pay for them just to be working with just her. And so that's how it worked.
Okay. Okay. And so now has that organization kind of continued that model?
I know of one other person who was actually in Jen's particular group home, who was there for several years, who also had private caregivers. And again, a lot of that was to get him out and doing things in the community more than just what was, if you were just in the group home setting, because with all of these institutions, funding is a problem, staffing can be a problem. So you have 6 clients. You just can't say, hey, there is, a football game. I want to take my client. He really likes football. I want to take him to the football game. Well, they can't afford to take the whole group home, maybe to the football game. So if you have a private caregiver, they can take them off and do this special thing for them. And again, that's what these trust funds can help facilitate. But, any group home will take their clients out. Maybe they're all going to go out for dinner, or they're all going to go to a movie, but that can't happen just all the time, every day. And Jennifer was so hyper, especially in the beginning. She really needed something going on, something happening, or she was going to look for things to do to entertain herself, which wasn't necessarily what we wanted her to be doing.
So does anybody else have any other questions, or I can kind of keep asking questions, but I want to give anybody else an opportunity.
I wonder if it's if this lacking language, both receptive and responsive, if that sounds familiar to anybody that's here with us today. I don't think Jen was the only one in the world who ever experienced this, but it was interesting that none of the professionals that worked with her had a case like that, which made it more challenging for them.
That is kind of interesting. I do think having a case of kind of and not knowing the level of Jen's impairment, but language impairments are very common after brain injury. Now part of it depends on the level, and sometimes people may have difficulty with responsive language and different sections, and maybe not a complete barrier within all of the areas, and maybe that was what was unique for Jen and different for the providers.
Exactly.
So yeah, but I don't know if anybody else on has any thing to share about any language impairments or difficulties that with individuals they work with or themselves. But that is definitely something, we find a lot of aphasia amongst individuals with brain injury, difficulty with that responsive communication, but then also communication processing and those pieces. So that can be really common for individuals.
And what was, I don't know what the right word is, troubling. When Jen was waking up from the coma, they tried to figure out what level you're at as you're coming out, how you're in a deep coma and when you're coming to a higher level. And they say, squeeze my hand or blink, they're issuing demands for you to do to show that you understand them. And she didn't. So, they had a hard time figuring out what level is she at in coming out of this coma, because she couldn't follow any demands, which made it unique. It was like we never were told, okay, she is now officially out of her coma. Because again, she just didn't follow the book on how you determine what level they're at, because she couldn't follow demands. Is she able to read and attend classes? We tried to see if she could read. We had various ways of testing that, and it didn't appear so. So, I'm not sure about classes. We tried virtually everything. There are talkers now that people can use who have trouble talking. And our daughter, Amy, Jen's younger sister, works, with students with those. But, the problem is if you have no language, it's like you can't learn sign language. It's all language based. All the writing and reading is all language based. And that's where her severe injury was. And, we tried to figure out if there was just anything that we could tap into. And, again, that's a big part of the story, what all we did try to work with. I'll just add, if another little thing, I've done, many book clubs, and I do have to say at every one of those book clubs, there's somebody in the audience who has been touched by traumatic brain injury in one way or another, a relative, a spouse, a son or a daughter or whatever. And so again, way too common. But anyway, a question I often get is, did I write this book, for healing? Did it help me heal? Initially, I could have never written this book. My emotions were way too raw and tender. And of course, initially we were just, working hard every day, just getting Jen to be all that Jen could be. But after a lot of years of healing, a friend told me that, because of the interaction with her caregivers and kind of how that evolved, I was told, this is too beautiful a story, you have to tell it. And I was like, yeah, but I'm not really a writer. And so I was told, okay, look, write a summary and I'll get somebody to write it for you. And as I started writing an outline or a summary, I realized I was the one that had to write the story. And did I do it for healing for me? No. Many people who write a memoir write them because they have healed and they've gotten to a better place and want to help other people get to that better place. That wasn't necessarily my purpose. My purpose was to get people to understand brain injury and the consequences, understand the effect it has on a family, and professionals, for them to understand it's not just the survivor that's hurting here and has to heal, it's the family and many times the community as well. So in writing the story, it was to help others. I had already gotten to a good place, but to write the story, I had to interview each of the characters. And I learned a lot more about my daughter in doing that, and what people felt about her, how they viewed her. So I got a whole other perspective that was really meaningful and wonderful.
So it allowed for that connection with your daughter and your family and those pieces.
Right, it did. And I can say I've been really rewarded as an author hearing what readers are taking away from the story. And that was the reason it was written, that it would help somebody else.
So wanting to help others in possibly a similar situation that are also dealing with brain injury and navigating that path.
Exactly. Exactly.
So any other questions from those joining us today?
I'll plug my book again, More Than You Can See, A Mother's Memoir. It's available at all places that you get a book, Amazon, your local bookstore. If they don't have it, they can order it. It's in many libraries in multiple countries, but it's certainly in a lot of libraries in this country. It's a great book club option because it really opens up discussion about points that sometimes people don't share with others. And it allows them to open up and talk about a concern that they have, or, about a loved one who, is in a situation where they need more care. Whether it's, like I said, brain injury or an aging parent or whatever the case. I've had one family tell me that it seemed to, it felt like I gave them permission to try putting their severely disabled teenage son in a group home, that maybe he would have a better life there, where he would have more socialization, more opportunities to be around more people than what they could offer just in the home setting. And they always felt guilty even thinking about that before, and then realized maybe they were being selfish and not really giving him everything that he needed. So, that's all good things that have come about.
Now, for you and your husband, and then also your younger daughter, because you said you involved her in decisions, were you guys always kind of on the same page about that, or was that something that there was that lot of discussion and kind of having to come to that realization and that same page?
You mean as far as writing the book?
No, as far as making that decision regarding
The
care.
group home? Well, for the first year and a half, she needed the nursing care along with, daily rehab, a lot of intensive work. After that, we had her home on holidays, we had her home on weekends, and it was exhausting. She had her room, and with a twin bed in it, and my husband slept on the floor in her room in case she got up during the night and would start wandering around. So somebody had to stay in her room with her, because we had a bi-level home and there were stairs, there were safety hazards. It was just intense. It was a lot. It was draining. And she would have been very isolated just being with us, even though I would have been staying at home with her, my husband would have been going to work, her sister would have been going to school. Where was she going to go? What was she going to do? And when she was in the group home setting, there were always people coming in and going and things going on. There was interaction. And we visited her, like I said, for me, it was every day for years. And then I backed off and, would only go maybe once or twice a week. But she was constantly involved in all kinds of things that would not have happened at home. And so there was, it was well understood between my younger daughter and Mark and I that we were not capable of this. And instead, we used our energy, I used it training people, researching, what other things can we try, training staff, visiting. And it was better for us. It preserved our health and well-being, and it was better for Jen. But it's hard. It's a hard decision. Nobody makes a decision like that lightly, for sure.
Now, you had also mentioned that you had moved, it sounded like you'd moved from New York to Connecticut during that time.
Well, we didn't move. The accident, we lived in New York at the time, in New York State, not New York City, New York State in the Hudson Valley. And the first rehab place that Jen went to was an hour west of us in Pennsylvania. And when she went to the second place, it was an hour east of us in Connecticut. So Jen moved. We stayed in New York until about 10 years ago, Mark and I moved to Pennsylvania. But, it was like Jen was moving around during the story. It's like Jen goes to 2 different rehab places and we're stationed in New York.
In the middle. And so how old is Jen today?
Well, she's Oh, she's getting up there. She's as old as I think I am. She's 49.
So this has been quite a long journey for you.
Yes, it is a long journey.
Okay. And so has she been through multiple group homes, or has she pretty much been with the same provider, same group home through this time?
Same group home.
That's wonderful. Wonderful that you've been able to have that, consistency with a provider and relationship. So, and had that opportunity. So yeah, any other questions that people may have about, their Barbara and Jen's journey and their experiences? And then how long ago did you write the book? Sorry that I don't know that.
I finished writing it. Okay. It took 4 years to write. I started writing it in 2018. It's been out a year now, which seems pretty incredible. It's the first writing was, you think that's the longest time, but that's the shortest time in getting a book out and published. Because then you go through editors and through publishers, and it's a long process. I have to say, when I started it, I knew nothing about the whole industry. I was an avid reader. I have a lot of respect for authors now, because it's really hard to get a book published and then get it, recognized and out into the hands of readers. It's a lot of work. And I'm still learning about the industry, but I really came into it knowing nothing. And, some close friends and then some professional people really helped, guide me to the point where, I have a book in my hands now and have it available for distribution, and that's been amazing.
And so has that also been beneficial? I mean, for the entire family, because it sounds like, yes, you were the author, but it also is this whole family story. And so, the whole family being able to have that experience as well.
Yeah, everybody has been really supportive of this. When I first thought of doing this, my husband, Mark, had a very valid question. Are you sure you want to do this? Number one, you're going to have to bring up a lot of painful memories. That do you want to rethink about a lot of those scenes? And then is this how you want to spend your time? This is how you want to spend your life, writing a book? And it was a valid question. And I thought about it, and it was like, yeah, I have to do it. Got to do it. And, stirring up those old memories of, the first time I walked into the hospital room and saw Jennifer. I didn't want to have to think about that again, but I had to, in order to write what I felt, what I saw, what was I feeling, so I could bring the reader on board with me. So that was hard to do. So it was a valid question he asked, but once I said I wanted to do it, he's been 100% on board, as Amy also. And, Mark, bless his heart, read all the initial drafts many times, over and over and over and over again. And, really helping me, to be a better writer, to, pull more out of me and that type of thing. Amy was a lot more, helped me get my timelines right. I'm terrible with dates and timelines. And some of them got a little mixed up, and she's like, Mom, that's wrong. That's backward. And, so that was interesting. And it was interesting as the first drafts were coming together. I say this is a mother's memoir because when I started asking Mark or Amy about certain things, their memories were slightly different than mine. Everybody remembers different parts of a scene or different happenings within a scene. And so after a while, it's like, but you know what? This is my memory. This is the way I remember it. So I'm going with that. And, they've been wonderful. And then it was approaching some of the main characters in the book, who it tells a lot about their personal family lives. And then I'm like, are you okay with this? And they couldn't have been more excited, more supportive. They allowed me to use their names. So, their family story got put out there as well as mine.
Okay. Any other questions that anybody has?
We have a very quiet group.
Yeah, you guys are a quiet group today. So any other thoughts or questions? No? Well, last chance. I just want to thank you so much today for, oh, here we go. How did you take care of yourself and maintain the family while going through this?
I think that's an excellent question. It's so important to take care of yourself. To begin with, it was really, really hard. And the only thing that held me together was just knowing my daughter was fighting for her life. And it would have been so easy to just drown in my own sorrow of what was going on. But I couldn't allow myself to do that when I had another child who needed, a functioning family to grow up. And, and my daughter's fighting for her life. So I couldn't cave in on myself. I had to, just say, you got to be strong. You got to hang in there. And after we got out of that life and death situation, then I was so involved in getting Jen the help that she needed, learning everything I could about her injury, that kept me engaged so that I didn't have the free time. I was so consumed with her and her care. But I have to, a silly thing that I did was initially after, she was starting to come out of the coma, and we started to come home and leave the hospital for a few hours at a time. When we come home, neighbors would want to come over and be with you, and the phone was constantly ringing. And sometimes I just needed time just to be with myself and mellow out. I got a tool out of my husband's garage and went in the backyard and sat in the grass and dug dandelions. And it was like I was away from the door. I was away from the phone. I was out of the hospital. I was outside, and I could cry. I could do whatever. And it was just alone time for me. And I think that was critical at that time. Did I do that very long? No, and the dandelions went over, but and not the best method to kill dandelions, but it was great therapy for me. But later on, I took up oil painting. And when it was always something I wanted to do. And when I was involved in painting, that had to be my focus. I had to think about, where am I putting this? How am I mixing this color? Doing all this. I couldn't think about all the other things that I dealt with during the day. And that was good therapy too. Again, giving my brain a pause, if you would. And before then, I jump back into the game and it's like, okay, now what are we going to do to fix Jen?
We have another question in the chat. How did you find the right publisher?
A very dear friend of mine helped guide me that way because I didn't know. She told me, to make a little bit of a story out of this. A dear friend of mine came from California and visited us. And, when she's visiting us, it's like, yeah, what have you been doing with your life? And I said, well, I wrote a book. So great. What have you been doing with it? I said, nothing. So I didn't know what to do with it. And she's like, well, here's what you need to do. You need to find out about the industry. And she knew about the San Francisco Writers Conference. And because that was in her area of the country, she says, it's going to be happening soon. You need to sign up and come, and you need to learn about the industry. You need to learn about the different kind of publishers and yada, yada, yada. So I took her advice. I went to this and I learned about the traditional publishers that we all know, the big boys. And I found getting accepted by them is really tough. You really need to be somebody. They need to know that you're already going to be on the New York Times bestseller list pretty much before they want to take you on board. If they do take you on as a little nobody, which is my category, they will take you on for maybe 3 months and then just drop your whole project. So, and then there's self-publishing, where you really have to know how to do everything from finding somebody to help you design your cover, to help you get the print run, to da-da-da-da-da. And I didn't want to get involved in all that. And then there's this thing called hybrid, which is a little bit of blend of both of these. And that was how I decided to go. They are more willing to take on new authors, and they work with you on, covers and all this kind of thing. But the biggest thing is they have the distribution system the same as the big guys. So I saw the advantages of the hybrid, and that was, I went to a couple of the workshops at that conference with the different hybrid publishers, and I particularly liked this one group. It was She Writes Press, and it was Brooke Warner is their main person. I'm not sure if she's a CEO or whatever it is, but I went to her workshops and I thought she was fabulous. And so I submitted to She Writes Press and was accepted. And I have to say, they've been excellent, sort of holding my hand through the whole process. If I had been an independent publisher, I don't know if I would have stuck with it. I think I would have gotten lost with a big box publisher, because they wouldn't have held my hand through the process the way She Writes Press did. But The biggest thing with this particular publisher was they have the distribution the same as Random House or any of those other guys.
Good. So even that was a process for you of going through that and that selection, those pieces.
It was. It was. Who knew there were such things, right? And we pick up a book and who knows, the whole process behind it, but it's a lot.
So I have a question. Have you been involved in kind of the brain injury advocacy realm of things and working on improving services for individuals with brain injury? Like you had mentioned, when she first had her injury, working with the Brain Injury Association of New York. Have you been involved in that realm at all?
For many years, I couldn't be involved in anything. I was so, focused on Jen, other than going to conferences and all that kind of thing. I didn't have anything to offer. I was there, a supporter and a member. But, I had to take care of my own family and daughter first. But when Jennifer was in the group home, I was on the board at her facility for some years. I also did some workshops for their employees when they come on. They like to have a family segment where these newly trained employees could come in and ask a family member questions that they couldn't ask client families in the group homes they were working at. And I loved that. It was, and I write about that in the book. It was a pleasure, and I felt like they gave to me as much as I gave to them. But it was interesting, like some of the questions that they felt they could freely ask. And one of the questions was, like, why don't all parents come more often to visit their loved ones? Some of them just get dropped off here and nobody ever sees them again. And so, I told them about another family that I knew and how difficult it was for the father to come see his daughter after what had happened to her, and how different people handle. So, giving them an understanding that, people handle situations differently. And one of the things I write about in the book is also one of the things that families get really upset about are laundry issues. And they're like, hey, your loved one, can't care for themselves and has severe disabilities, and you're worried because they have pink socks. I don't get that. What is wrong with families thinking about that? And so I talked about, hey, we worry about the things that we can control. We can do something about the pink socks. We can't do anything about some of these other issues. So, it was great. So I've done those kind of things. And now I feel my contribution is getting my book out. I have talked with, some Brain Injury Association groups and brain injury networks. And, they have invited me on to their forums. And I think probably next year at the New York Brain Injury Conference, I'm maybe going to have a workshop that's going to be on premises, working with them. That we're working on that starting in January. So, I try to do my part. But the book now is my biggest part in getting the word out, the biggest audience that I can.
So that's kind of the next part for you of that, getting that audience out and raising awareness.
Right.
So wonderful. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story. I had put the link to the Amazon for the book in the chat. So if anybody wants to grab that there, they're welcome to. And thank you so much for sharing your story today. And we appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate your organization and appreciate that you have this forum. We didn't have something like this when Jen was first injured. You know, this is amazing place for people to come and have that support group that's so important. And so I appreciate you and the people that are here listening. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.